Obsession director Curry Barker has said that Nikki is not possessed by a demon. But could she be? Because if not, it raises an interesting question. If she isn't possessed, why does the wish curse manifest in ways that look exactly like a classic demonic possession? In this video, we're going to see whether these two ideas are actually in conflict or whether both can be true at the same time. Last week, I posted an analysis of the movie Obsession. I'll put the link to that video in the description here. And some viewers observed in the comments that my take on the possession of Nikki was wrong because the director had said in interviews that Nikki is not in fact possessed by a demon and that the One Wish Willow didn't curse Nikki. It was Bear's wish that was actually the curse. Now, I am not going to try to argue against Curry Barker's stated intention and try to say that he's wrong about his own movie. That would just be stupid. But I do think that one of the things that makes a work of art, including film, great, one of the things that makes it have staying power, is whether that work of art generates conversation. I mean, think about it. What are the books, the plays, paintings, sculptures, movies, the stories that are hundreds or even thousands of years old and are still being talked about and giving us nightmares to this very day? If we never broadened our discussions beyond what a creator said he or she intended, we would just be watching videos saying, here's what Curry Barker said, like 10,000 videos of just repeating that. So we're going to take a look at two main points of viewer feedback on my first Obsession video. First, that the One Wish Willow isn't cursed, and second, that Nikki is not possessed by an actual demon from hell. And instead of picking a side, let's look at how the manifestation of Bear's wish, which was Barker's intention, and the demonic framework that I observed are actually telling the exact same story. Before we get to Nikki, I actually think there's still a discussion to be had about the One Wish Willow itself possibly being cursed because something happened there. Now, Curry Barker has said again clearly that it wasn't the willow that was cursed. The thing that was cursed was what Bear wished for. So this implies that Bear's intentions were actually the thing that inflicted the curse on another person, taking away that person's free will. That person's autonomy was the actual curse. And I can get behind that. I actually agree with that. Barker has said that the willow is magic, even though it's not actually cursed. And yeah, there's definitely some magic going on with this. Because when Bear buys more One Wish Willows towards the end of the movie to try to make another wish to undo his first one, the new willow won't break. And Bear actually uses the steering wheel of his car to try to break the willow against the steering wheel, and it just will not break. So it's like the willow itself is preventing that second wish from being made. And of course, one of the stipulations is that you only get one wish. Surely Bear had previously wished multiple times a day that Nikki loved him before he used the One Wish Willow, and nothing had ever happened with any of those wishes. So why did something happen when this object got involved? Was it just that the willow gave Bear a hyper focus for his wish so that it had more force at this point than it had in all the past times that he had made the same wish, but just sort of off the cuff? Again, the willow absolutely plays a role, and one way that that can be seen is that it creates a binding contract. Catholic exorcists have pointed out frequently that when the demonic gains a foothold in a person's life, it creates a binding contract. In Catholic demonology, demons are highly legalistic in the sense that they will hold a person to the exact words that person says when creating a bond with the demonic, again, whether intentional or not. A demon will hear the words, for example, I wish for so-and-so to love me more than anyone in the world, and implements that very literally according to a rigid legalistic understanding of those words. In Catholic demonology, demons are like the ultimate most evil lawyers. And no offense to lawyers. We need them to navigate the laws under which we live. And if any lawyers are watching this, I love you. But we also know that a lawyer with less than the best intentions, who's a very skilled lawyer, can alternate between rigidly interpreting the law and finding loopholes in the law and using either one of those approaches against the opposition's words to interpret those either absolutely literally or loosely open to being messed around with, depending on whatever is going to land a legal win. And demons do the exact same thing in order to entrap a person and manipulate that person's life. Now, with the One Wish Willow, the legally binding contract is printed on the box. And the male shopkeeper at the end of the movie even says this to Bear. He says, it's all right there on the box. So you could say that the use of the product indicates agreement with the product's terms. Doesn't that sound familiar? Remember that the next time you download software and you get that massively long, like 300-page long end user license agreement. Whether you are aware of the terms or not, you're still bound to them. If you don't read the fine print, that's on you. You are still responsible for everything in that contract. So by using the product, breaking the Willow, the user, in this case Bear, expresses agreement to the terms of this binding contract. And this maps really well onto classic demonic legalism. It's not just one wish per item, it's one wish period, ever. Buying new Willows is not going to work, indicating that the terms of this contract cannot be revised. You are locked in. The aspect of any wish at all bringing disaster upon the wisher is worth considering too. When Bear buys the first One Wish Willow, the woman working in the shop tells him that people who buy this item come back complaining and wishing that they were dead. But towards the end of the movie, again, when Bear goes back to buy new Willows, there's a different shop attendant. And he says that he's already made his wish. And there he is. He's alive. He's not visibly negatively affected. So I'm wondering if the end result and how it affects the person making the wish is in the nature of the wish itself, how things turn out. Maybe it's a reverse result kind of thing, where if you're basically a decent person and you wish for something that would be good on its face, that wish ends up turning into evil against you. But if you're a bad person and you make a deliberately ill-intentioned wish, you don't get a bad effect coming back on you. It's either good or neutral. So Bear's wish on its face would not have been a bad thing. If Nikki did love him with a genuine love that was freely given of her own accord, that would not have been bad. It would, again, depend on what kind of love this would be. And again, I talk about this in my other video. But we get a clue that the male shopkeeper who made that wish isn't all that great of a person when he says something to Bear that can easily get lost in the swelling music. When Bear is backing away from the shop counter, the shopkeeper's voice is fading out at this point, but we can just hear him saying, well, you could die. I mean, you could just kill yourself. And the way he says it is like a throwaway line. He's so nonchalant about it. Like it's no big deal if Bear were to end his own life. Because again, that's the only thing that can bring the wish/curse to its end is with the death of the person who makes the wish. But the shopkeeper says this like, you can have tomato soup for dinner tonight, yeah, you could do that. That's so maybe if you're a bad guy, because it seems that the shopkeeper is not a decent person the way he says this, and maybe he wished for a bad thing. So maybe that's how the Willow operates. If you're a bad person and you wish for a bad thing, you don't get negatively affected. And I mean, that looks an awful lot like a cursed object to me. And the way that would function. But again, I'm just throwing ideas out here. So let me know what you think about this in the comments. So regardless of whether the One Wish Willow is just a prop with no power, if it provides a magic focal point for Bear to ramp up his intention, or if it creates a legally binding agreement with the forces of hell, its MO and end result map really nicely onto traditional Catholic demonology. So the Willow itself does not actually have to be cursed in order to attract a demonic entity. So let's talk now about what actually happens to Nikki. So in my first analysis, I said that in Catholic demonology, obsession refers to the third of 4 stages of demonic influence, right before full-on demonic possession. Obsession is the stage where a demon starts to overtake a person's mental and emotional life. It's the stage where a demon is starting to break down the person's will in preparation for that final stage of full-blown controlling a person's will or compromising the will that happens in possession. And so the movie's title has a bit of a double layer to it because it can refer to being emotionally obsessed with someone or something and to this third stage of demonic influence. Clearly, Bear's wish, however it was intended, has overthrown Nikki's will. It didn't change the real Nikki's will, but it imprisoned her will and replaced it with something else. And I think that what's actually going on in the customer service call, when the agent asks Bear if he wants to talk to Nikki, that's what happens. What we're hearing on the other end of the phone is Nikki's will screaming. It's not her soul exactly, but it's her will that is being held captive and suppressed. And that will has been replaced by Bear's obsession, which takes residence in Nikki's body. Now, one of the things that's necessary for demonic activity to move into a person's life is an invitation. And that invitation need not be intentional. It doesn't even have to be expressed in words. It can simply be a state of vulnerability. When a person is in a vulnerable condition, depressed, anxious, fearful, desperate, in despair, hopelessness, demonic forces can take advantage of that and move into the person's life. Now, this is not to say that those conditions necessarily ever come from the demonic or that people experiencing those states are evil at all. It's just to say that when these things happen to a person, demonic forces exploits fault lines. Bear is in a prime position for this because early in the movie, he basically falls apart. When his cat Sandy dies, everything just crashes in on him at the same time. Nikki doesn't love him. Now his cat dies. That cat was probably Bear's only comfort in his emotional pain, and then it gets taken away from him. So the ground is primed, so to speak. Bear is vulnerable. He's in a really bad place. And that night, he sits on his bed and just melts down. He's pushed beyond his limit at that point. And that is exactly the kind of thing that can attract the wrong kind of attention from the spirit realm in traditional Catholic demonology. And then Nikki exhibits behavior that exactly tracks with classic demonic possession. The personality changes, the physical changes, the self-harm, carrying out actions against her own will. These periods of lucidity when the real Nikki breaks through and the entity isn't manifesting at that moment. We get a vocal change in the very creepy bedroom scene where Nikki is in the corner and she's screaming at Bear about how he doesn't love her like she loves him. And she screams, "It's not mutual," and her voice on that word mutual deepens and distorts. And this kind of vocal change has been reported by Catholic exorcists as something that can happen when a possessed person is undergoing an exorcism. This can be indicative of the demon manifesting. Nikki also loses control over her bodily functions. At one point, she urinates on the floor while she's standing up. And I have to say, I think that this has got to be a nod to The Exorcist when Regan comes down the stairs and crashes her mom's party. And she looks at a guest at the party who's an astronaut, and he's been talking about going on a new mission into space. And Regan couldn't have heard that because she was upstairs in her room when he said that. When she comes downstairs, she looks at him with this very blank expression. In a monotone voice, she says, "You're gonna die up there." And then she urinates on the floor. That's exactly what I thought of when this happens to Nikki in Obsession. Nikki's physical movements are non-human at times, and Bear mentions this to her. He says, "No more moving weird," as if she could control that. And when these kind of movements happen, they're clearly different than when the real Nikki is breaking through and she backs away from Bear in horror at what is happening in that moment. And she does this twice, once on the first night when Bear makes that wish and he and Nikki are kissing, and she suddenly sort of wakes up, comes to her senses, and she throws herself backwards away from him. That movement is fast and violent, but it's still clearly the way that a human being moves. And this happens again at the party when Nikki backs away from Bear and yells, "It's not me, it's not me." And she starts throwing the Jenga pieces off of the table. But at other times, she moves in a non-human way. This happens every single time during her possessed state when the real Nikki is being suppressed. So again, that manner of non-human-like movement could also be a sign of demonic possession. But the real clue that something demonic is going on here is knowledge of the unknowable. One of the Catholic Church's criteria for determining if a person is demonically possessed is, does this person exhibit knowledge of something that they have no way of knowing? And Nikki does exhibit this when she finds Bear and Sarah in the car in the park at night towards the end of the movie. How did Nikki know that that was where Bear was going to be? Apparently, she has no possible way of knowing this. Now, maybe there are alternative explanations for how she had this knowledge, and I'd love it if you add some of those in the comments if you have any ideas. But this really does look like knowledge of the unknowable. So everything that Nikki exhibits after Bear's wish is textbook demonic possession. So where's the overlap between this take and Curry Barker's stated intention? Well, Bear invites demonic influence into his and Nikki's relationship, which is a friendship with his despair, his vulnerable state, his refusal to accept reality, his refusal to respect Nikki's autonomy, and his entering into a binding spiritual contract by using the One Wish Willow, agreeing to its terms. So a couple of things could be happening here. An actual demon that, if you will, specializes in obsessive feelings in people could have been drawn into this situation as a result or an expression of Bear's obsessive feelings. But instead of possessing Bear, who summoned it or drew its attention, it possesses Nikki instead in order to make Bear experience the result of his obsessiveness. If it's not an actual demon and it's Bear's obsession that's possessing Nikki, that's not classic demonic possession, but it can absolutely come under the category of demonic influence. Making that specific, dark, harmful characteristic, the obsession, an all-consuming presence, is definitely something the demonic would and could do. It can take that single emotional state and cause it to completely overtake a person's life. And it might not be so much about taking over Nikki's life as it is about, again, taking over Bear's life, because he's the one who drew the attention of this demonic presence. So even if it's not a demon possessing Nikki per se, but it's Bear's obsession that's possessing her, it can still be from demonic influence. But tell me what you think in the comments. I do think that there's room for interpretation here, and I would love to get a good discussion going. Do you think that Curry Barker's intention of Bear's obsession possessing Nikki has room for an interpretation of the classic demonic possession that we see in other movies like The Exorcist, like Hereditary, that something actually, a demonic entity has possessed Nikki? Thank you so much, as always, for giving my video some time out of your day. I always appreciate it so much. I hope you enjoyed this discussion, and I hope you join me for the next one. Until then, take good care. Bye now.